I'm 61 years old. My name is Marlene. I've spent most of my life believing in structure, in tradition, in doing things the right way. I married young, raised 2 children, and kept our house in order like it was my own quiet kingdom. I wasn't one for risks or big feelings. Love to me was a steady presence, not a wildfire, not a secret. But last summer, when my son came back from college, something changed. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please don't make the same mistake I did. It was midday when Aaron came home. He was always punctual, that boy, neat, respectful, brilliant, just like his father. The driveway was still wet from an afternoon rain when I saw his old Toyota roll-in tires kissing softly on the pavement. I stood at the kitchen window, drying my hands on a dish towel, watching him with a little lump in my throat. I missed him terribly. The house had felt colder since he left, not just empty, but quieter, in a way I didn't know how to explain. His laugh used to echo off the walls. Even the creaks in the floorboards seemed less frequent without him stepping across them. He came inside with a duffel bag over his shoulder, and that same crooked smile he's had since he was 5. Hey, Mom, he said, dropping the bag by the door and wrapping his arms around me. He smelled like damp leaves and laundry detergent, and when I hugged him back, I realized just how much broader his shoulders had become. We made small talk over dinner. He picked at his food more than usual, and I noticed he avoided eye contact when I asked how classes were going. I chalked it up to stress, finals, maybe, or breakup. College life can be messy, but over the next few days, I started to sense something deeper. Not wrong exactly, just hidden. One night, I found him sitting out on the back porch. The sky was color of pewter, the kind that comes just before a summer storm, and he was staring out into it like he was waiting for something to fall out of the clouds. I brought him a mug of chamomile, a ritual he used to love when he had nightmares as a kid, and sat beside him. Something on your mind? I asked. He hesitated, his jaw clenched the way it used to when he was about to cry, but didn't want to show it. I've been meaning to talk to you about something, he said quietly, not looking at me, but I don't know how. I gave him the space he needed. I didn't push. I just sipped my tea and waited. Do you remember when I was 12 and I told you I didn't want to go back to camp? I nodded. You said the other boys made you feel different. He glanced at me, then eyes sharp with recognition. That wasn't the whole reason, he said. I didn't have the words for it then, but I knew something about myself, and I was scared to tell you. The air between us grew heavy, as if even the trees were holding their breath. I reached for his hand. Aaron, whatever it is, you can tell me now. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said, Mom, I'm gay. It's strange the thoughts that rush into your mind when something like that is said. They're not always the right ones. Sometimes they're just old habits, old echoes from a world that taught you to expect one thing and fear another. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't cry or yell or throw my arms around him. I just sat there stunned and ashamed that I hadn't seen it sooner. He looked away again, and in his profile I saw a flicker of something like resignation, like he'd been preparing for the worst. I placed my hand gently on his cheek and turned his face toward me. You're still my son, I said, barely more than a whisper. Nothing changes. That he closed his eyes, and a tear slipped down his face. I thought maybe you'd be disappointed, he said. Disappointed. That word struck something deep in me like a crack spreading through porcelain. How many times had I told him to be proud of who he was? How many times had I said I'd love him no matter what? And now here he was scared to tell me the truth about himself. That night, after he went to bed, I stayed on the porch for hours. The rain had started soft at first, and then steady. I let it soak through my cardigan, through my skin, as if it could wash away every ounce of ignorance or hesitation I'd ever held in that quiet. I realized something else. It wasn't just Aaron who'd been holding a secret. I had one too, one I hadn't even fully admitted to myself yet, and the way his bravery shook something loose inside me. I wasn't ready for what came next. The morning after Aaron's confession, I moved through the kitchen in a daze. The coffee brewed as it always did. The sun crept through the curtains just the same, but something had shifted in the atmosphere in me. I watched him from doorway as he scrolled on his phone, curled up on the living room couch in the oversized sweatshirt he used to wear in high school. He looked calm now, lighter, and I was proud, but also rattled, not by him, never by him, but by the realization of how small my world had been that evening as we prepared dinner together, chopping peppers and onions side by side like we had 100 times. I asked him a question I hadn't planned to ask. Is there someone? His knife paused mid-slice. He gave me a sheepish grin. Actually, yeah. And just like that, a new chapter in our relationship began, not mother and child, but two people relearning each other with honesty as the foundation. He told me about Jordan, a fellow architecture student, a few years older, kind, creative, and apparently obsessed with terrariums. Aaron's eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in years when he talked about him. I wanted to bring him home this summer. Aaron said, voice careful, but I didn't know if I could. My hands stilted. Sink. I turned slowly to him. You still can, I said, if you want to. There was a silence, then a nod, a small one, but it meant everything. 3 days later, I met Jordan. He was taller than I expected, with warm brown eyes and a quiet presence. He brought a pie from a local bakery, peach my favorite, and wore a button-up shirt that he kept tugging at nervously. Mrs. Keller, it's so nice to meet you, he said. Marlene, I corrected gently, please. We sat in the garden for hours that afternoon. I asked him about his family, his studies, and those infamous terrariums. He was thoughtful, a bit shy, and he kept glancing at Aaron with a look that was unmistakable tenderness mixed with awe. I'll admit, I felt something twist in me at first, not jealousy, not exactly, but displacement, a realization that my son's heart belonged to someone else now, not as a replacement, but an expansion. After dinner, I stood at the sink, again washing dishes, as they laughed in the next room. I watched them through the door. Aaron leaning in close to show Jordan a photo album, his hand resting lightly on his knee, and I thought, this is what love looks like, not always neat, not always predictable, but real. As I dried my hands, I caught my own reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look like someone stuck in the past. I looked awake that night, after they'd gone upstairs. I poured myself a glass of red wine and walked out to the porch again. I sat in the same spot where Aaron had first told me his truth, and that's when it happened. A name surfaced in my mind, one I hadn't thought of in decades. Claire. It came with a memory, a blurry summer afternoon when we were both 16, lying on a blanket by the lake, her hand brushing mine, our laughter echoing off the water. We never spoke of it again. Not after the way my mother looked at us when she found us too close together on back porch. Not after Claire moved away. I had buried that memory deep, told myself it was a phase, a moment, nothing more. But sitting there in the stillness of the night, I let it rise, and I didn't push it away this time. Maybe Aaron hadn't been the only one living with a secret. Maybe the universe was giving me a second chance, not just to understand him, but to rediscover something in myself I had long forgotten. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with that, not yet, but for the first time in a very long time, I was willing to find out. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the soft hum of birds outside the kitchen window. I brewed coffee and stood in the doorway, staring out into the yard, clutching the warm mug between my hands like it might steady the fluttering in my chest. Something had been stirred awake in me. Something I thought I'd buried for good all those years. I had played the role of a wife, a mother, a homemaker, roles I loved in their own right, but never once had I stopped to ask myself what was left of me beneath them. Aaron's bravery cracked open something I wasn't prepared for. Later that day, when Jordan and Aaron left for the farmer's market, I wandered up to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since Richard, my late husband, passed away. Dust shimmered in the light beams from the small circular window, and I found myself drawn to an old cedar chest, tucked beneath faded boxes of holiday decorations. Inside were remnants of my younger self, journals, letters, photographs, yellowed at the corners. I found one tucked between the pages of an old poetry book, a snapshot of me and Claire, both of us wearing cut-off shorts and grinning like fools under the summer sun. Her arm was around my shoulder, and I remembered how safe I felt in that moment back. Then I had no words for what I felt. Only that when she laughed something bloomed inside me. When she looked at me, really looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never did around anyone else, but the world I grew up in didn't have room for that kind of feeling. Not for girls like us. It taught me to tuck those thoughts away and move on, to marry a good man, raise good kids, and not ask too many questions about the flutter in my chest that never really went away. I sat there on the attic floor for a long time, turning that photo over in my hands, and I cried, not out of regret exactly, but out of grief for all the versions of myself I never got to explore. When the boys returned home later that afternoon, I tried to act normal, but Aaron could tell something was off. He always could. "You okay, Mom?" he asked gently, placing a small bouquet of sunflowers on the table. My favorite. I smiled, trying to swallow the lump in my throat, just thinking, I said, about how fast time moves. That night, after Jordan went back to his Aram and Aaron headed upstairs, I poured another glass of wine and sat by the fireplace. And this time I didn't push the memories away. I'd let them breathe. I'd remembered way Claire used to sing along to Fleetwood Mac on her cassette player, the way her fingers danced over mine when she taught me to braid hair, the way we held each other in the dark, trembling and fearless all at once. That wasn't a phase, that was real, and I had spent most of my life pretending it hadn't meant anything. I took out an old notepad from the kitchen drawer and sat at the table, hands shaking slightly, and wrote 3 simple words: "Look her up." I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe she was married, maybe she had kids, maybe she had forgotten all about that summer by the lake, but something in me needed to know, not to chase anything, but to honor the part of myself I had silenced for decades. The next morning, I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keys, heart pounding harder than it had in years. I typed her name into the search bar, Claire Halstead, and just like that, there she was, gray hair cut short, an elegant, warm smile, an article from the local paper, retired high school English teacher living just 2 towns over. My breath caught in my throat. What were the odds? I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Aaron came into the kitchen and saw me frozen there. He leaned over my shoulder. "Who's that?" I hesitated. Then for the first time I told him that was someone very important to me a long time ago. He looked at the photo, then back at me, and he smiled, not with surprise, not with judgment, just warmth. "Maybe it's time to reconnect," he said simply. "You deserve that." It was strange feeling like the child, while my son gave me permission to be whole. But maybe we were both just learning in our own ways how to finally live without hiding. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept drifting back to Claire's photo, her kind eyes, and that same tilt of the head she'd always had when she was trying not to laugh. By morning, I'd written 3 drafts of an email and deleted each one. What do you say to someone you haven't seen in 44 years, someone who once meant everything and then became a memory you weren't allowed to keep? Eventually, I settled on honesty. "Hi, Claire. I'm not sure if you remember me, but this is Marlene Keller. We were friends a long time ago, back in the summers by Pine Lake. I found your name in the local paper and just felt moved to reach out. If you're open to it, I'd love to reconnect." I hovered over the send button, my heart pounding like a school drills, and then I clicked it. For the rest of the day, I busied myself with cleaning folding towels that didn't need folding, alphabetizing the spice rack, rearranging picture frames that hadn't moved in years, anything to distract myself from checking my inbox. Every 10 minutes, Aaron noticed everything okay. I might have emailed someone from my past. He smiled knowingly. Good. Around 700 p.m., as I was pouring a cup of tea, the notification pinged. Claire had replied, "Marlene, of course I remembered you. I've thought of you more times than I can count. I'd love to see you again. There's so much I've always wanted to say. Please, let's meet." My hands trembled as I read it. My tea sat forgotten cooling beside me. We agreed to meet at a small cafe by the lake the following Saturday, the same lake where we used to lie in the grass and dream about the future. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and that same soft smile. "Marlene," she said, rising to embrace me, "you haven't changed a bit. I laughed, feeling shy and vulnerable and overwhelmed all at once. I think my niece would disagree with you. We sat for hours talking like no time had passed about our lives, our marriages, our kids. She'd never married. She said not because she didn't want to, but because she never quite found someone who felt like home. I tried, she said, stirring her coffee, but no one ever made me feel the way you did, even back. Then I looked out the window to the rippling lake. In the distance I used to think I imagined that I whispered that I made it bigger in my head than it ever really was. Claire reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't. There was a stillness in that moment, not awkward, not rushed, just peace. Later, we walked along the lake path, the scent of summer lilacs drifting in the breeze. I never told anyone about you. I admitted, not even Richard. I understand, she said back. Then we weren't allowed to be who we were, but now, I said, stopping to look at her, maybe we are. She smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. It's never too late, Marvy. When I got home that night, Aaron was sitting at the kitchen table with Jordan, playing cards and laughing. The house felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in decades. He looked up when I came in. How'd it go? I paused in the doorway, heartful. It felt like finding a piece of myself I forgot I was missing. Aaron nodded as if he understood completely. We never talked about it in death, not in the way mothers and sons usually do, but from that moment on there was a quiet understanding between us. We had both carried secrets for too long, and we were both finally free of them. That summer changed everything, not because I fell in love again, but because I remembered what love really was. Not just sacrifice, not just tradition, but truth, intimacy, connection, even if it takes a lifetime to rediscover its worth every moment. And to anyone listening, I only hope you find your truth before it's too late. Don't wait for permission to be who you are.